My name is Emily Carter, and if you had met me a year ago, I used to think our house was the safest place in the world. My father, Martin, loved that house. My mother, Diane, kept it neat. My sister, Clara, and I grew up there, believing nothing could truly break our family. When I got engaged to Ethan, I wanted a simple wedding, not a fancy show. I pictured warm lights, a few flowers, and my family sitting close enough that I could hear them laugh. But Clara was in the middle of her divorce, and she was full of anger. She started calling relatives and telling them I ruined her marriage. She said I took her husband's side and embarrassed her, even though I barely spoke to Grant. The lie spread fast like smoke under a door. Soon, messages stopped coming. Invitations stayed unanswered. Even my mother avoided my eyes. In that same house where I once felt loved, I began to feel like a stranger who didn't belong. The day my father, Martin, died, the house in Bristol, United Kingdom, felt like it had lost its heartbeat. People came in and out with soft voices and sad eyes, and every room smelled like black tea and old flowers. I kept expecting to hear his cough in the hallway or his shoes on the kitchen tiles, but the silence stayed heavy. My fiancé, Ethan, held my hand and tried to keep me steady, yet I could feel myself slipping into something cold and unreal. My mother, Diane, looked like she was moving through fog, and my sister, Clara, acted like she was strong, but her strength looked more like anger than grief. A few days after the funeral, my stepmother, Margaret, said we needed to talk about practical things. She gathered us in the living room where my father used to sit with the newspaper. The curtains were drawn even though it was daytime, and the house felt smaller than it ever had. Margaret spoke first, careful and smooth, like she had practiced. "Your father's affairs are being handled," she said. "There's an inheritance, and we should be respectful." Clara sat beside Mom, rubbing her hands together like she couldn't wait for the next part. I didn't want to hear about money. I wanted my dad back. But I stayed quiet because everyone kept looking at me like I was already a problem. Then Clara dropped it like a stone into water. "Mom and I inherited the house," she said, and she smiled the way she used to smile when she got her way as a kid. Margaret nodded like that was the natural order of things. My stomach tightened. "Inherited it how?" I asked. Clara leaned back and crossed her arms. "Dad wanted it kept safe," she said. "And since you're, busy with your wedding drama, it's better this way." I stared at her, shocked at how quickly she could turn my grief into an insult. Mom didn't correct her. She just looked down at her own hands. Margaret added, "There's also money. A large amount." She paused, like she wanted the number to sound even bigger. $911,000,000. The room spun for a moment. It didn't feel real, like someone had said the sky was green. I thought about my father, who worked hard, saved carefully, and never liked waste. I thought about him teaching me how to check the locks at night, how to stand up straight, how to speak honestly. And I thought if he left that much, he must have had a reason and a plan. I asked again, "Where do I fit into this?" Clara's eyes narrowed like my question was an attack. That's when the kindness in the room snapped. Clara stood up, walked closer, and spoke low, almost calm. "You don't fit," she said. "You bring trouble. You make people pick sides." I felt my face burn. "I didn't do anything to you," I said, my voice shaking. "You lied about me. You told people not to come to my wedding." Clara's expression didn't change. "Maybe they just don't like you," she said. Margaret watched us with a blank face, and my mother stayed silent, which hurt more than anything Clara said. In that moment, I realized my mother was choosing peace with Clara over truth with me. The next part still makes my hands tremble when I remember it. Clara pointed toward the hallway like she was directing a stranger out of a shop. "Pack your things," she said. "This is ours now." I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. "It's my home too," I said. Clara leaned in and whispered, Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." Her words landed in my chest like a heavy door slamming shut. I looked at Mom, waiting for her to shout, to slap the table, to say stop. But Mom only swallowed and said, "Please don't make this harder." I went upstairs on legs that didn't feel like mine. The house creaked under my steps the way it always had, but now the sound felt like a warning. In my room, I opened drawers and saw pieces of my life. School photos, old letters, a scarf my father bought me in Glasgow during a work trip. I shoved things into a suitcase without thinking. I wanted to take everything, but I couldn't. It felt like the walls were watching, like the house itself was embarrassed for me. Ethan called while I was packing, asking how I was holding up, and I couldn't even form a full sentence. I told him, "They want me out," and then I started crying so hard I had to sit on the floor. When I carried my suitcase downstairs, Clara was waiting by the front door. Margaret stood behind her, arms folded. Mom stayed in the living room, not even brave enough to see me leave. Clara opened the door and said, "Don't come back unless we call you." I stepped outside, and the cold air hit my face. For a second, I wanted to turn around and scream, but I didn't. I just walked down the path, past the little garden my father loved, and out onto the street like I was nobody. That night, I stayed in a cheap rented room on the edge of Bristol, staring at the ceiling and listening to cars pass. My phone buzzed with old wedding messages I couldn't bring myself to answer. I kept thinking about the $911 million and the way Clara said, "ours," like she had earned it. Mostly, I kept hearing her whisper, "Find somewhere else to die." And in the middle of all that pain, one strange thought kept rising again and again. My father was careful, fair, and stubborn about doing things properly. Something about this didn't feel finished, like a chapter had been ripped out of the book before anyone could read it. When Mr. Holt, my father's lawyer, called me and asked me to come to London, I didn't expect anything. I thought the meeting was just a formality, one last cruel reminder that the house and the fortune were gone. But something in his tone, calm, steady, almost curious, made me pack my bag and take the early morning train from Bristol. The air outside the window was gray, the sky low and heavy, and for the first time in days, I felt a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd finally get answers. When I arrived at the law firm, I froze in the doorway. My mother, Diane, and my sister, Clara, were already there. My stepmother, Margaret, sat beside them, her nails shining like she had polished them just for this moment. None of them spoke to me. Clara only smirked as if to say, "Why are you even here?" Mr. Holt entered with a folder in his hands and sat down opposite us. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his tone polite but firm. "Before we begin, I need to clarify a few things about Martin Brooks's final will." He paused, his eyes flicking from Clara to Margaret, then back to me. "Because it appears," he continued, "that not everyone has read it carefully." Clara frowned. "We already did. We signed it." Mr. Holt smiled faintly. "You signed the receipt of the document," he said, "not the understanding of it." The air in the room shifted. I could feel it. Something was about to break. He opened the folder and slid a few pages across the table. "This," he said, "is your father's last and valid will, signed and witnessed 6 months before his passing." He placed his assets, specifically the Bristol house and the $911 million estate, into a family trust. Margaret tilted her head. "Yes, which we manage," she said smoothly. Mr. Holt raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly." He turned to page 3 and began to read aloud. "I leave full ownership of the Brooks estate in trust, with the condition that all daughters of Martin Brooks are to be provided for equally, housed, supported, and respected within said property." Clara blinked, confused. "Daughters? You mean me and Mom?" Mr. Holt shook his head. "It specifies all daughters. That includes Harper Brooks." He gestured toward me. "And also Sophie Hale, Margaret's daughter from her first marriage, who resides in New York City." Margaret went pale. Mr. Holt continued reading, his voice calm but precise. If any caretaker or beneficiary of this trust shall attempt to remove another beneficiary from the home or deny them rightful support, their access to the trust shall be revoked immediately, and full control shall pass to the eldest daughter, Harper Elaine Brooks. The room fell into stunned silence. Clara's mouth dropped open. "That can't be right," she said, her voice trembling. "Dad told me, he told us." Mr. Holt interrupted. "I assure you, this is your father's legal will, confirmed by the courts. You may not have read the fine print because you were too busy celebrating an inheritance that was never truly yours." I couldn't breathe for a moment. I looked down at the document, my name written clearly, my father's handwriting beside his signature. He had protected me, silently, carefully, like he knew this day would come. Margaret spoke next, her voice sharp and defensive. "This is absurd. Martin would never leave control to her. She's young, emotional. She doesn't understand finance." Mr. Holt cut her off, his tone crisp. "Mrs. Brooks, your husband made his reasoning very clear." He flipped to the final page and read the last paragraph. "Margaret Brooks shall not hold direct control over any asset or trust property. She may remain in residence only under the authority of the trustee to ensure the safety and independence of my daughters." Margaret's face drained of color. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. Clara looked between them, panic growing in her eyes. I sat there quietly, my fingers trembling against the edge of the table. "So," I whispered, "they kicked me out illegally?" Mr. Holt nodded. "Exactly. By removing you, they violated the terms of the trust. Effective immediately, their access to funds is frozen, and you, Harper, are now the acting trustee." Clara's chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You can't do this," she shouted. "This isn't fair." I turned to her, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. "Fair," I said softly. "You kicked me out of my home. You told me to die somewhere else. You lied about me to our family. And now you want fairness?" Clara's face twisted, but she had no words left. Mr. Holt stood, closing the folder. "The documents will be filed today. Mrs. Brooks," he looked at my mother, "you may stay in the home if Harper allows it. Otherwise, you'll need to make new arrangements." My mother finally looked at me. Her eyes were wet. "Harper, please," she whispered. I didn't know, but I didn't want to hear it. I stood slowly and said, "You didn't want to know." When I walked out of that office, the cold London air hit my face like a baptism. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I didn't feel like the poor, broken girl who lost everything. I felt like my father's daughter, calm, strong, and certain. As I crossed the street, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Did it go okay?" he asked. I laughed a little, the sound shaky but real. "It went better than okay," I said. "Turns out I own the house." He was silent for a moment. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." And as the city moved around me, I realized something. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs time to arrive. And when it does, it speaks louder than any lie ever could. That night, as the train carried me back to Bristol, I stared out at the fading light and whispered, "I read it, Dad. I finally read it." I didn't go back to the Bristol house that same day. Even though the will had made me the trustee, my chest still hurt when I pictured that front door and the way Clara had opened it for me like I was a stranger. Instead, I checked into a small hotel near Paddington in London, took a long shower, and sat on the edge of the bed with the papers spread out beside me. The words kept swimming in front of my eyes. My name, the trust, the rules, the warning my father left as if he could see the future. I wasn't celebrating. I was trying to understand how love could be written so clearly on paper and still be ignored by the people who claimed they loved me. That evening I called Ethan. His voice was careful, like he didn't want to push me in any direction. "Do you want me to come up?" he asked. I held my phone with both hands and stared at the hotel window, at the moving lights and the busy street. "Not yet," I said. "I need to go home first. Not to beg, not to fight, just to stand there and remember who I am." He was quiet for a second, then he said, "Whatever content, I'm with you, no matter what." That was the moment I realized I had been starving for one simple thing: someone believing me without needing proof. The next morning, I took the train back to Bristol. It was cold, and the platform smelled like wet metal. I walked from the station to the neighborhood slowly, like my feet were learning the path again. When I reached the gate, I paused. The garden was still there. The apple tree looked the same. The house looked like it always had, and that almost made it worse because it proved the problem was never the house. It was the people inside it. I used my old key. It still worked. That small click sounded louder than a shout. Inside, Clara was in the living room. She was holding a mug, but her hands were shaking just enough that tea sloshed near the rim. My mother sat on the sofa with swollen eyes, and Margaret stood near the fireplace like she belonged there by law of habit. They all turned toward me at once. The air went tight, as if the house itself was listening. Clara spoke first, sharp and fast. "So you think you're in charge now?" I set my bag down calmly. "I don't think," I said. "The trust says it. Dad says it." Margaret stepped forward, her voice silky again, trying to wrap around my mind the way she always did. "Harper, darling, let's not be dramatic. Families make mistakes. We can handle this like adults." I looked at her and felt something settle in me. Not rage, not fear, just a clear line. "You don't get to call me darling," I said. "Not after you stood behind Clara while she threw me out." My mother's face crumpled. "I didn't know," she whispered. I thought it was what your father wanted." I nodded once, not cruel, just honest. "You didn't ask," I said. "You let Clara speak for him, because it was easier." Clara slammed her mug down. "You're enjoying this," she snapped. "You always wanted to be the favorite. You always wanted to win." I took a slow breath. "Clara, I wanted a wedding where my family showed up," I said. "I wanted Dad alive. I wanted you to stop lying. None of that is winning." For a second, her eyes flickered. Something small and scared. Then it disappeared behind anger. "You ruined my life," she said again, as if repeating it might make it true. I stepped closer, not to threaten her, but to stop the room from swallowing my voice. "You ruined your marriage with your own choices," I said. "And when it ended, you needed someone to blame. So you picked me because it was easy." Margaret's lips pressed together. "We can talk about money later," she said, and the word money came out like a prayer. That was when I decided the rules out loud. I lifted the folder Mr. Holt gave me and opened it on the dining table. "Here's what happens now," I said. "Mom, you can stay in the house. You're still my mother, but you will not ignore me or let me be treated like trash. Clara, you can stay only if you follow the trust terms. No threats. No forcing anyone out. No lies used as weapons. Margaret, your name isn't on this trust as a controller. You can stay only if you respect the boundaries. If you don't, you leave." Margaret's face tightened. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, and my voice surprised even me. It wasn't loud. It was steady. Dad made sure I could. Clara laughed, bitter. "You're going to throw me out after everything I'm going through?" I didn't flinch. "You threw me out when I was grieving," I said. "And you told people not to come to my wedding. So don't ask me for softness you never offered." My mother reached for my hand, and I let her, but only for a moment. Her fingers were cold. "Harper," she whispered, "please. We can fix this." I pulled my hand back gently. "We can't fix it by pretending it didn't happen," I said. "The only way we move forward is truth." That afternoon, I called Ethan again and asked him to meet me halfway in Bath, just for a few hours. I needed a place that wasn't filled with old memories and sharp corners. We sat in a small cafe near the river, and I told him something I hadn't admitted out loud yet. I don't want a big wedding anymore, I said. I don't want to beg anyone to care. Ethan's eyes softened. Then we'll do it your way, he said.
Simple. Real.
Yours. So we planned a small ceremony near Edinburgh, a quiet place with stone walls and warm candles. I invited the friends who had stayed kind when my family turned cold, Mila, Tanya, and my neighbor Eileen from Bristol. I didn't invite Clara. I didn't invite Margaret. And I only invited my mother if she came with honesty, not excuses. The day of the wedding, I didn't look for missing faces. I looked at the faces that were there. I wore a simple dress, held a small bouquet, and when I walked toward Ethan, my hands weren't shaking. For the first time in months, I felt like my life belonged to me again. Later, back in the hotel room, I opened my phone and saw a message from Clara. It was short. You really did this without us. I stared at it for a long time before answering. Then I typed one line and sent it. I didn't do it without family. I did it without lies. When I returned to the Bristol house after the wedding, I didn't feel like an intruder. I stood in the hallway, touched the old wallpaper, and let the quiet settle around me. I thought about my father's voice, his steady hands, the way he always told me to read everything twice. I whispered, I read it, Dad. And I meant more than the will. I meant the truth of my own worth. Because in the end, the money, whether it was $911 million or £1, was never the real inheritance. The real inheritance was this. I survived being erased. And now I was writing my story in ink no one could rub out.